416, December 7, 1950. Funchilin Pass, North Korea. The road is a ribbon of ice cut into black rock, climbing toward 4,000 feet. A single column of trucks crawls downhill in low gear, every headlight hooded, every engine running rough in the thin, freezing air. Staff Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, 28, U.S. Marine Corps Motor Transport, is on the shoulder beside a stalled GMC CCKW 353, a 2.5-ton, 6x6 cargo truck Marines still call a Jimmy. The truck weighs nearly 10,000 pounds empty, closer to 15,000 loaded, and right now it is blocking the only lane wide enough for a convoy to pass. The men behind it are packed into canvas-covered beds and clinging to side rails. They are infantry, engineers, corpsmen. Some are walking because the trucks are too full. Ortiz is not supposed to be here. His job is to keep vehicles moving, not to stand exposed on a mountainside while rifle fire cracks across the pass. At 4:17, a round hits rock 10 feet above his head. It throws off a shower of stone chips like thrown gravel. Ortiz flinches, then forces his eyes back to the truck's open hood. The driver, Private First Class Eddie Latham, 19, has both hands shoved into his armpits. His cheeks are white and chapped. His breath is loud in the dark. "The hell is it?" Latham asks. Ortiz doesn't look up. "Fuel starvation," he says. "Or you lost spark." But it isn't spark. He knows the sound of a starving engine. A Jimmy on the edge of quitting doesn't die clean. It coughs. It surges. It falls on its face as soon as the throttle opens, like something is pinching off its throat. At 4:18, Ortiz pulls the fuel line at the inlet side of the engine's fuel filter canister. He cracks it just enough to see what comes out. The first dribble is not fuel. It's slush, thin ice crystals suspended in cloudy gasoline, streaked with rust. Water has gotten into the jerrycans somewhere up the line, and at -20 Fahrenheit, that water has turned the truck's fuel system into a choke point. Behind them, the convoy compresses. A Marine lieutenant runs forward, crouched low. "We can't stop here," he says, breath-cutting. Fox Company's holding Toktong, but the Chinese are everywhere. Ortiz wipes his hand on his jacket and nods once. He doesn't argue. He knows what everywhere means in this pass. Small arms on the high ground, mortars walking in, and the road itself, narrow enough that one dead truck can turn a fighting withdrawal into a pileup. At 4:20, Ortiz points at the driver. "Get me your canteen cup. And find coffee. Any coffee." "No." Latham stares. "Coffee." Ortiz finally looks at him. His eyes are bloodshot from wind and sleeplessness. "Move." The lieutenant squints. "What are you doing, Staff Sergeant?" Ortiz answers with the tone he uses in a motor pool when a young mechanic is about to ruin an engine. "Filtering the fuel." A burst of automatic fire snaps down the slope at 4:21, short, controlled. A Marine on the tailgate of the truck behind them answers with an M1 Garand, 8 rounds, distinct and sharp. A second Marine cycles a bar and fires in pairs. The sound echoes in the cut rock like it's inside a steel drum. Ortiz keeps working. He pops open the truck's fuel filter canister, an oil bath-style assembly meant to trap debris and water, effective in normal weather but vulnerable when ice forms faster than the system can shed it. The gasket sticks. He pries it loose with a screwdriver, careful not to tear it. He doesn't have spare parts to waste. At 4:23, Latham comes back with a canteen cup and something else, a cloth coffee bag, stiff with frozen grounds, the kind the mess section uses when it has time to boil water. The coffee inside is cold enough to be syrup. The lieutenant watches. "This is a joke." Ortiz doesn't smile. "It's a filter medium," he says. "Cloth is cloth." He takes the coffee bag and unfolds it. The cloth is stained dark, but the weave is tight. Tight weave catches particulates. It will also catch ice crystals if the flow rate is slow enough. He dumps the cold coffee into the canteen cup and holds it up so the lieutenant can see it. The liquid is almost black, with floating flecks. This, Ortiz says, is water and grounds and heat we don't have. But the cloth is what matters. Latham looks embarrassed. They're gonna laugh. Ortiz says, let them laugh after we're moving. At 4:26, Ortiz orders 2 Marines to bring jerrycans from the next truck. The jerrycans are standard 5-gallon cans, stamped steel, battered from weeks of hard use. One of them sloshes with a heavy sound, more water than it should have. Ortiz sets the coffee cloth over the mouth of the canteen cup like a liner. He braces the cup between his knees and starts pouring fuel through the cloth slowly, controlling the stream so it doesn't overflow. The fuel comes out clearer on the bottom side. Rust flakes and ice stay in the cloth. A rifle shot snaps close at 4:27. The lieutenant ducks instinctively. Ortiz doesn't. He keeps pouring. His hands shake, but he makes them steady. This is not a hero pose. It is a mechanic's decision under pressure. Do one thing at a time, do it right, or the vehicle dies and people die behind it. To anyone watching from the column, the scene looks absurd. A Marine staff sergeant using cold coffee like laboratory equipment on the side of a mountain road while the enemy is shooting. But Ortiz has seen this kind of improvisation before, on long convoys where doctrine and manuals stop mattering and friction wins. The Marines did not plan to fight a winter war in North Korea with supply lines stretched into the mountains. They came north fast after the Incheon landing, and the tempo outpaced the logistics. Trucks ran day and night. Radiators cracked. Batteries died. Oil thickened. Fuel contaminated. The enemy did not need to destroy a division outright if it could slow it down in terrain like this. At 4:31, Ortiz pours filtered fuel into the truck's tank through a funnel he keeps in his tool roll. He then drains the filter canister into the snow, watching the separation, a thin layer of water beads on the bottom like mercury. He scrapes ice from the canister with the edge of a dog tag chain and wipes it clean with a rag already stiffening from frost. He reseats the gasket, closes the canister, tightens the clamp until it bites. He reconnects the fuel line and checks the fitting by feel. In the dark, he works by memory. At 4:33, the lieutenant crouches closer. You sure? Ortiz looks down the road. The convoy is stalled for hundreds of yards, a line of men and machines trapped in a corridor. In the distance, mortar rounds thump somewhere behind the ridge, low and methodical, walking closer by ear. Ortiz says, "No. But we're not staying here." At 4:34, he climbs into the cab, slams the door, and yanks the choke. Latham turns the ignition. The starter whines. The engine catches, stumbles, almost dies. Ortiz pounds the dashboard once. Again. Latham tries again. The engine catches and holds. It runs rough, then steadies. Ortiz watches the oil pressure gauge climb and settle. He listens for the cough that means the line is still clogged. At 4:35, the Jimmy is alive. Outside, someone laughs, sharp, disbelieving, relief cutting through fear. Another Marine yells, "Coffee did it!" Ortiz doesn't answer. He leans out the window and shouts to the lieutenant over the engine noise, "Get them moving! Keep spacing! No bunching!" The lieutenant nods and runs back down the line, waving his arms. Marines climb onto tailgates. Drivers grind gears carefully to avoid spinning on ice. At 4:37, Ortiz puts the truck into gear and eases it forward. The tires bite. The column begins to breathe again. Above them, on the dark slopes, the enemy fire continues, sporadic, probing. The pass is still a kill zone. But one truck no longer blocks it. And in the next hours, Ortiz will learn something he will carry for the rest of his life. In a withdrawal under fire, a small fix can decide whether a unit moves or dies in place. 4:41, December 7, 1950. Funchilin Pass. The column crawls again, 5 miles per hour at best, each truck leaving a disciplined gap so one mortar round doesn't cripple 3 vehicles at once. Ortiz keeps the Jimmy in second gear, engine RPM steady, avoiding sudden throttle that might pull remaining ice through the line and choke it again. At 4:46, a messenger jeep skids up behind him. The driver leans out. "Motor T, Sergeant." Battalion says every third truck's coughing. "They want you forward." Ortiz doesn't like leaving a vehicle once it's moving. But he also knows the pattern. Contaminated fuel is a convoy disease. If it's in one truck, it's in the cans. At 4:50, he signals Latham to hold speed and not touch the fuel selector. Ortiz jumps from the cab, boots hitting packed snow, and runs along the right side of the road where the slope rises, less exposed than the drop-off. He moves bent low, tool bag slapping his hip. The trucks are a mix of Marine and Army vehicles, mostly GMC CCKW 353s, some Studebaker US-6 cargo trucks, a few M35 prototypes not yet common, and scattered 2.5-ton wreckers. Many have canvas tops that snap in the wind. Men inside keep their rifles between their knees to keep the metal from freezing to skin. By 5:02, Ortiz reaches the next stalled truck, an Army Jimmy with a cargo bed full of ammo crates. The driver is standing helpless at the hood, face gray with cold. "What's it doing?" Ortiz asks. "Dies when I give it gas," the driver says. "We bled the line." Ortiz doesn't waste time. He cracks the fuel fitting. The same cloudy slush appears. Same rust streaks. Same problem. At 5:05, a Marine private brings a canteen cup. Another brings a coffee bag. Word has spread down the column like a rumor with teeth. Men are already pulling cloth from ration bags and shirt tails, anything that can catch debris. A corporal mutters, "This is insane." Ortiz answers without looking up. Insane is letting a column freeze in place. He repeats the process, cloth over cup, fuel poured slow, ice and flakes trapped. He drains the filter canister, scrapes it clean, reseats the gasket, tightens the clamp. The work takes 8 minutes when done without hesitation. At 5:14, rifle fire rattles again from the ridge line. A tracer cracks overhead, orange and flat. Ortiz stays on the engine block side of the truck to use it as cover. He hears an M1 fire from somewhere down the road, then the longer burst of a bar. He's not blind to the combat. He's just not letting it run his hands. At 5:18, the Army Jimmy restarts. The driver looks at Ortiz like he's seen a magician. Ortiz points at the jerrycans. "Stop pouring from that one," he says. "That can is water. Mark it." The driver nods too fast. He wants certainty. Ortiz can't give it. He can only give him a truck that runs long enough to clear the pass. 5:23. Ortiz moves to the next vehicle. Then the next. He learns to work faster. He learns what to ignore. He ignores the laughter. At first, the men laugh because it's easier than admitting they are frightened. A mechanic using cold coffee as a fuel filter is ridiculous, and ridiculous things make men breathe. But by 5:40, the laughter changes. It becomes a kind of quiet respect, the sound men make when a simple trick keeps them alive. Broader context, why a truck mattered here. The convoy Ortiz is fighting to keep alive isn't just a supply run. It's part of a withdrawal under pressure in the early weeks of the Chosin Reservoir campaign, when UN forces fought their way out of encirclement in brutal cold. In this terrain, infantry doesn't move without logistics. Ammunition, rations, medical gear, radios, and the wounded, everything rides in trucks. A 2.5-ton truck is not glamorous. It's not a tank. It has no armor. Its engine is vulnerable. Its tires are vulnerable. But it is the spine. Without it, a battalion becomes a foot column in mountains, and foot columns die faster in winter. The enemy understood this. Ambushes didn't need to destroy a whole convoy. They only needed to stop it, one blocked road, one burning truck across the lane. Then mortars and small arms could do the rest. Ortiz's improvised filter isn't a miracle. It's a delay tactic against physics and poor fuel discipline. But in a narrow pass, minutes are everything. Scene: the road tightens 6:07, December 7th. The sky begins to lighten. Gray, not dawn, just less dark. The road hairpins around a ridge where the slope falls away on the left into a white void. At 6:12, a mortar round lands short and detonates in the snow, throwing a geyser of powder. The concussion rolls across the column. Men duck even though the blast is already past. At 6:15, Ortiz is kneeling by another stalled truck when the lieutenant from earlier returns, now breathing hard. Division wants the column broken into packets, he says. Small groups. Faster through the turns. Ortiz nods. He's holding a fuel line in one hand and a rag in the other. Then you need fewer dead trucks, he says. The lieutenant grimaces. You've got 10 minutes before they bracket this stretch. Ortiz looks at the filter canister. The gasket is cold and stiff. He presses it in carefully anyway, tightening the clamp with a wrench that burns his fingers through gloves. At 6:21, he hears a different sound, the heavy clank and churn of tracks. A pair of M26 Pershing tanks, big, 46-ton machines with 90mm guns, are moving up the road to act as rear security. Their engines roar louder than any truck. Their presence is both comfort and danger. Tanks draw attention. They also crush any vehicle that stops wrong in front of them. A Pershing commander pops his hatch and shouts, "Move it! Keep the lane clear!" Ortiz stands and signals the driver. "Start it," he says. The truck coughs once, then catches. Ortiz slams the hood shut with both hands. 6:25. The vehicle rolls forward just as the Pershing noses into the hairpin behind it. The tank's tracks grind ice into a fine powder. Its turret traverses slowly, scanning the ridge. Ortiz runs alongside the moving truck for 10 yards, then drops back and sprints to the next stalled vehicle. The problem spreads, and the solution hardens by 7:10. Ortiz has repeated the cold coffee filter method on 6 trucks. Each time, the failure is the same. Ice and rust blocking flow at the filter and carburetor feed. Each time, the cloth catches debris long enough to get a truck running. But at 7:18, the method fails. The truck he's working on, a Marine Jimmy loaded with wounded, starts, runs for 20 seconds, then dies hard. Ortiz tries again. It catches, stumbles, quits. He hears the starter grind and then slow as the battery drains. He curses once, quietly. At 7:22, he checks the fuel pump. The diaphragm is stiff from cold, and the pump is struggling to pull fuel through any restriction at all. The cloth filter is too slow now. The pump can't keep up if the line is still contaminated upstream. Ortiz looks at the jerrycans stacked on the side rails. He chooses one he has marked earlier, cleaner sound, less slosh, and rips the cap off. He smells it. Gasoline should smell sharp and clean. This one smells damp. He makes a decision. At 7:24, he tells the wounded truck driver, "We're switching fuel sources. Drain your day tank and refill from only this can. No mixing." The driver hesitates. "That's fuel. We need it." Ortiz leans close. "You need a truck that runs more." The driver nods, swallowing hard. Ortiz and 2 Marines tip the filter canister and drain the worst fuel into a shallow trench in the snow, away from exhaust heat. It's waste. It's also survival. At 7:33, with cleaner fuel and a freshly scraped canister, the truck starts and holds. The wounded inside are silent, bundled in blankets, eyes tracking the motion like animals in a crate. Ortiz watches it roll away and then feels something he does not like, anger. Not at the enemy. At the preventable failures. At the jerrycans filled carelessly. At water in fuel. At the way small sloppiness becomes a mortal threat when the temperature drops and the road narrows and rounds start snapping over your head. The moment under fire 8:02. Ortiz is midway through filtering another batch when the shooting intensifies. Not random cracks now. Controlled volleys. Someone is directing fire. At 8:04, a Marine on the ridge line yells down, "Movement! Left slope!" A burst of automatic fire answers him from the darkness. The sound is lower than a bar, likely a PPSH-41, 7.62 by 25 mm, high rate of fire, common among Chinese units in Korea. Tracers stitch down toward the road. Ortiz flattens behind a truck wheel. The tire is as tall as his chest. It is not cover against rifle rounds, but it breaks line of sight and buys seconds. At 8:05, a round slams into the truck's fender, sparks bright even in daylight. Metal rings. A second hits the engine block and ricochets. Ortiz waits for the pause between bursts. When it comes, he moves. He crawls back to the open hood, hands working without looking, tightening the clamp, reseating the line. His breath is loud in his ears. His fingers are numb. He forces them to obey. At 8:08, the truck starts. It lurches forward. A Marine nearby shouts, "He got it!" Ortiz doesn't answer. He's already running again, because he knows what comes next. Once a convoy starts moving, it's harder to stop, and the enemy will try to stop it again. And Ortiz understands the brutal equation of this pass. A filter made from cold coffee cloth is not a gimmick. It's a weapon in a logistics fight, as real as any rifle. 8:13, December 7th, 1950. Funchilin Pass. The convoy is moving in broken packets now, clusters of 5 to 8 vehicles spaced by 50 yards, engines straining, brakes squealing on ice. The Marines on the ridgeline keep firing short bursts to suppress movement above the road. The tanks at the rear, 2 Pershings and an older M4A3E8 Sherman, roll with turrets traversing, their guns elevated toward the high ground. Ortiz runs between trucks until his lungs burn. He stops only when a vehicle coughs and loses speed. He listens. He watches the exhaust. Black smoke means rich mixture. White vapor means cold. A sharp, sudden drop in RPM means fuel starvation. At 8:19, he catches up to a Marine Jimmy that is bucking like it's on a bad carburetor. The driver is trying to feather the throttle. The truck surges, then sags. Ortiz slaps the cab door. "Don't rev it," he yells. "You'll pull trash through." The driver's eyes are wide. "It's dying." Ortiz points. "Roll it to the inside shoulder." "Now." The driver steers toward the rock wall. The truck scrapes snow and stone and stops with inches to spare. Men in the bed jump down and take positions, rifles angled up the slope. A corpseman crouches behind the rear wheel, hands on a wounded man's blanket. At 8:23, Ortiz opens the hood and feels the fuel line, cold and stiff. He cracks the fitting. The fuel dribbles, then stops. The line is constricted again. This time, Ortiz doesn't ask for coffee. He already has it. By now he has a system. 1 coffee cloth folded into a tight cone, a second cloth as backup, a canteen cup, and a short length of rubber hose scavenged from a damaged radiator line. He rigs the cloth into the canteen cup, then fits the hose to direct filtered fuel straight into the carburetor inlet without spilling. It isn't pretty. It isn't in any manual. But it reduces steps, reduces exposure time, and keeps the flow controlled. At 8:27, a mortar round detonates somewhere up the road. The blast echoes, then fades. The convoy doesn't stop. It can't. Ortiz pours fuel. His hands tremble. He forces them steady. At 8:31, the driver tries the ignition. The engine catches. Ortiz listens. It still has a ragged edge, but it holds. "Go," Ortiz says. The driver releases the brake. The truck grinds forward and merges back into the packet. Ortiz watches it for 3 seconds to confirm it doesn't die, then turns and runs uphill again. Broader summary: who Ortiz was before this pass. Ortiz wasn't born into the Marine Corps. He enlisted in 1940, a 19-year-old from southern New Mexico who had grown up around ranch equipment and worn-out farm trucks. He learned mechanics the way many did then, by breaking things and fixing them because there was no money for replacements. In the Marines, motor transport wasn't glamorous. It was long hours in the mud, swapping engines, patching tires, and keeping trucks running that were never meant to be driven at full load, day after day, over mountain roads. He fought his first war in the Pacific as a junior mechanic attached to a logistics unit. He learned what humidity does to electrical systems, what salt does to steel, what neglect does to machines. He also learned that the men who keep vehicles moving rarely get named in after-action reports. By the time Korea erupted, Ortiz was a staff sergeant with a reputation. He could coax life out of dead engines, and he could do it fast. He wasn't famous. But in a motor pool, reputation spreads like oil. Scene: the pass becomes a choke point again. 9:04. The road narrows into a section with a rock face on the right and a steep drop on the left. A single disabled vehicle here would trap the entire packet behind it. Ortiz knows this. So do the Chinese forces on the ridges. At 9:07, a truck 2 vehicles ahead takes fire. The windshield spiders and then collapses inward. The driver swerves, overcorrects, and the truck's front left wheel slides off the road. Men shout. The vehicle teeters with a sickening slow motion, tires scrabbling for traction on ice. The rear wheels grind snow and stone. At 9:08, Ortiz runs forward, waving both arms. Brake! Brake! The driver slams the brakes. The truck stops with half its front end hanging over open air. Behind it, the packet compresses, exactly what they're trying to avoid. At 9:10, Ortiz gets to the cab. The driver is bleeding from his forehead. Glass is in his eyebrows. He is alive, but stunned. "Out," Ortiz says. He grabs the man's jacket and pulls him clear. The lieutenant appears again, face tight. "Can you move it?" Ortiz looks at the front wheel. The truck is unbalanced. If it shifts another foot, it will go over. And if it goes over, it will drag the road edge with it, snowpack and gravel, turning a lane into a crater. At 9:12, Ortiz makes a quick inventory. They have a wrecker somewhere behind, but getting it forward will take time. Time they don't have. They have tanks behind, but a tank can't safely push a truck perched like this without risk of sending both off the edge. Ortiz spots a solution, crude but workable. "Get chains," he says. 2 sets. And bring the pushing up slow. The lieutenant hesitates. "A tank pull." Ortiz nods. "Not a pull. An anchor." At 9:16, Marines drag heavy chains from a cargo bed. Ortiz orders 1 chain wrapped around the truck's frame rail, not the bumper. He knows the difference. A bumper will tear off. A frame rail will hold. At 9:19, the Pershing inches forward, engine rumbling low. Ortiz signals the tank commander to stop with the front glacis aligned behind the truck's rear end, but offset toward the inside shoulder. He wants the tank's mast to stabilize the situation, not shove it over. At 9:22, they attach the second chain from the truck's frame to a towing point on the tank. The tank doesn't pull yet. It simply holds tension, keeping the truck from sliding further outward. "Now," Ortiz yells, "everyone on the inside side. Push." At 9:24, 6 Marines brace their shoulders against the truck's left rear corner, the inside side, and push with boots digging into ice. Another Marine uses a steel bar as a lever against the wheel rim. The truck shifts, 2 inches, then 4, back toward the road. The tank maintains tension like a giant hand. At 9:27, the truck's front wheel bites back onto packed snow. Men keep pushing until the chassis is fully on the lane. Ortiz points at the driver's seat. "New driver," he says. At 9:29, a different Marine climbs in and starts the engine. It coughs. Ortiz knows that cough. "Fuel," he says, already moving to the hood. They've saved the vehicle from the cliff. Now it threatens to die and block the road anyway. At 9:32, Ortiz cracks the fuel fitting. Cloudy slush again. The lieutenant's expression hardens. "You've got to be kidding." Ortiz doesn't answer. He folds the coffee cloth, fits it into the cup, and pours. He can feel the heat of the Pershing's engine behind him like a small furnace. He uses that heat, positioning the filter canister briefly near the tank's exhaust area to soften the ice, careful not to ignite vapor. At 9:41, the truck starts clean. Ortiz slams the hood shut and steps back. "Move," he orders. The packet rolls forward again at 9:43. The cost, exhaustion and consequence by 10:15, Ortiz is running on depletion. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't slept in a full cycle. Cold has turned his muscles into heavy rope. Each time he kneels, his knees hit ice like rock. At 10:22, a Marine private stumbles beside him and says, "Staff Sergeant, you're bleeding." Ortiz looks down. He doesn't feel it. A cut on his knuckle has opened and frozen, then reopened. Blood is dark against the white snow. He wipes it on his sleeve and keeps moving. This is not courage. It is a mechanic's stubbornness under a situation where failure has a body count. At 10:37, the column reaches a slightly wider stretch where vehicles can pull off without blocking the lane. The lieutenant finally grabs Ortiz's arm. "We've got a lull," he says. "You need to get back in a truck." Ortiz shakes his head once. Not until the last packet clears. The lieutenant looks past him to the line of trucks and men. His jaw tightens. He understands something. This entire movement is being held together by small acts, riflemen on ridges, tank crews inching through turns, drivers not panicking, and one mechanic refusing to let a clogged fuel system become a stopping point. At 11:03, the last truck in Ortiz's immediate sector clears the choke point. The firing on the ridge has diminished. Not because the enemy has disappeared, but because the target is moving. Ortiz finally climbs onto a tailgate, breathing hard. He sits on an ammo crate and tries to flex his fingers. They won't fully close. He looks at the coffee cloth in his pocket, stiff, blackened, crusted with frozen debris, and feels a rare, quiet satisfaction. Not pride. Just confirmation. The method worked, and it worked enough times to matter. But he also knows something else. If this convoy survives today, it will not be because of one trick. It will be because the unit learns fast, because improvisation becomes doctrine, and small fixes become standard practice. And Ortiz is about to turn an embarrassing joke, cold coffee as a fuel filter, into a lesson that will follow him long after the shooting stops. 12:18, December 7th, 1950. A temporary halt south of Funchilin Pass. The convoy has cleared the worst turns and gained a few miles of breathing room. Vehicles pull into a shallow bowl of terrain, still exposed, but wider than the pass, where drivers can check fluids and retighten chains without blocking the road. The air is bitter. Exhaust hangs low like fog. Ortiz sits on a tailgate with his tool bag at his feet. A corpsman wraps his knuckles with gauze that stiffens as soon as it touches the cold. Ortiz barely looks at it. At 12:26, the lieutenant returns with a clipboard and a face that has finally stopped moving in a constant flinch. "Division G, for wants to know what the hell you did," he says. "They're asking because they're seeing it in other packets now." Ortiz nods once. He takes a pencil and writes on the back of a map margin, "Cloth filter, slow pour, drain canister, avoid contaminated cans, mark water-heavy cans, keep spacing, don't rev starving engine. It isn't elegant. It's a field note. But it will move from hand to hand until it becomes procedure. At 12:41, a captain from Motor Transport walks over. Marine, not Army, gloves off, hands red. "You Ortiz?" he asks. Ortiz stands. "Yes, sir." The captain looks at the coffee cloth in Ortiz's pocket, then back at his face. "They said you were using coffee to fix trucks." Ortiz answers plainly. "Not coffee. Cloth." Coffee was just what the cloth came in. The captain's mouth tightens into something close to a smile, then disappears. "Write it up," he says. "Step by step. I want it in the battalion maintenance log tonight." Ortiz nods. "Yes, sir." The captain lowers his voice. "And next time, tell your drivers to keep water out of their cans." Ortiz looks at the convoy. Men huddled around fires, drivers checking oil, Marines chipping ice from brake lines. "We'll try," he says. "But we're not always in control of what gets handed to us." The captain studies him. "No," he says. "We're not." Broader summary: how improvisation becomes standard in the months that follow. The cold coffee filter story spreads because it is simple and repeatable. It becomes a teaching point in motor pools, field filtration, fuel discipline, and winterization. The technical lesson is straightforward. Water in fuel is tolerable at higher temperatures because it separates and drains. In deep cold, it freezes and becomes a physical obstruction. Rust and debris from old jerrycans amplify the problem by creating a slurry that packs into filters. The truck's mechanical fuel pump can only pull so hard. Any restriction upstream causes starvation under load. A cloth medium, coffee cloth, clean rag, even layered gauze, can catch larger particles and ice crystals long enough to restore flow, especially if the pour is slow and the fuel is kept as warm as possible without open flame. The tactical lesson is harsher. A disabled vehicle is an enemy weapon when the terrain forces a single lane. Ortiz's notes don't change the war. But they reduce a specific failure mode. They reduce stoppages. They reduce pileups. In winter operations, that matters. Scene, after action, the accountability 1903, December 7th. The convoy reaches a rear assembly area where engineers have scraped the road and established a basic maintenance point. Ortiz is called into a tent lit by a single lantern. A major sits behind a folding table. A map is pinned to canvas. A radio operator copies messages with numb fingers. At 1911, the major looks up. Staff Sergeant Ortiz. Ortiz stands at attention. "Sir." The major taps the map. "We lost 3 trucks in the pass," he says. "Not to enemy fire. To breakdowns and slide-offs. We almost lost the entire packet behind them. Your actions kept at least 4 vehicles moving." Ortiz doesn't react. Praise is not why he did it. He did it because the road was closing and men were trapped behind an engine that wouldn't breathe. The major continues. "I'm not interested in hero stories. I'm interested in repeatable methods. Explain exactly what you did." At 1914, Ortiz explains in short sentences, like he's describing an engine failure to a junior mechanic. He lists the symptoms. He lists the diagnosis. He lists the steps. He describes the materials. He warns about open flames and fuel vapor. He describes marking contaminated cans and isolating them. He describes using vehicle heat, not fire, to thaw ice in a canister. The major writes while Ortiz speaks. At 1927, the major nods once. "Good," he says. "We'll circulate it." Ortiz salutes and turns to leave. The major stops him. "One more thing," he says. "What made you think of it?" Ortiz pauses. He answers honestly. "Farm trucks," he says. You filter what you can. You keep moving. The major studies him for a second longer. That's the point, he says. Keep moving. Evolution, what it did to him, the past doesn't leave Ortiz unchanged. He returns to the motor pool different, less tolerant of sloppy habits, more vocal about fuel discipline, more willing to fight for small preventative measures that commanders often ignore because they aren't dramatic. He becomes the man who insists on draining water separators, marking suspect cans, and teaching drivers how to recognize starvation before they rev an engine into failure. By March 1951, Ortiz is promoted to gunnery sergeant. Not for a single trick, but for what the trick represented: composure under fire, technical clarity, and leadership in the most unglamorous part of war. He spends the next year rotating between convoy duty and training. He teaches young Marines how to winterize vehicles, how to use the right oil weights, how to protect batteries, how to keep fuel systems clean. He demonstrates field filtration with a clean cloth and a canteen cup. He tells them why it matters, not because it's clever, but because it prevents a stoppage that turns into casualties. After the war, the quiet second life, Ortiz leaves Korea in 1952. He stays in the Marines long enough to see the service modernize its vehicle fleet, to watch new trucks arrive with improved filtration and standardized water separation. He retires in the late 1960s after nearly 3 decades in uniform. He does not write a memoir. He does not go on a lecture circuit. He goes back to mechanics, civilian fleet maintenance, training younger technicians, working on diesel engines that are more advanced but still vulnerable to the same truth: bad fuel stops everything. Years later, in a motor transport schoolhouse, an instructor tells a class about winter operations. He holds up a coffee filter, not as a joke, but as a demonstration. He explains how a simple cloth medium can save an engine long enough to clear a danger area. He references a withdrawal through a mountain pass, a convoy under intermittent fire, and a staff sergeant who refused to let a truck die in the wrong place. Ortiz's name may not always be remembered. The lesson is: legacy. What changed the cold coffee fuel filter story survives because it teaches doctrine in plain terms. Logistics is combat power. Small mechanical failures become tactical disasters in restrictive terrain. Improvisation is not magic. It is applied understanding under pressure. Field expedient methods belong in training, not only in desperate moments. In marine motor transport culture, Ortiz becomes a reference point, an example used to remind drivers and mechanics that their work is not behind the fight. It is part of it. On paper, it's a maintenance anecdote. In reality, it's a moment where one truck starting again meant a road stayed open, a packet kept moving, and men did not freeze and die in place. And in the long chain of decisions that keep units alive, that is enough.